From atomic radiation turning insects into giant monsters, to invaders from outer space, to mad scientist experiments going wrong, the 1950s was one of the most prolific and best decades for the science fiction genre. Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel, where we're dusting off the classics. My name is Daniel, and today I'm going to be giving you my picks for the top 10 best sci-fi movies of the 1950s. Now, this list was really hard to make because I've seen so many movies from this genre, from this decade, and I love so many of them. And that kind of leads me to say that this is just my list. It's totally my opinion on what the best is. This is not ranked based on IMDb score, Rotten Tomatoes score, or just general cultural appreciation. I'm not really interested in lists like that. This is my opinion. These are the 10 films that I love the most. But that 10 spot was really hard to pick. A lot of movies could have went in there, but I'm going to go ahead and go with War of the Worlds from 1953. Now, this is, of course, one of the adaptations of the classic H.G. Wells book of the same title, and it's probably the most beloved and well-known, except for maybe the Steven Spielberg one. It's a pretty simple plot here. A small town in California is attacked by invading Martians, and they begin a worldwide invasion. Now, this film is just a ton of fun. It's not terribly deep, and you're probably going to get more character emotion stuff out of that Steven Spielberg version, but it's just so completely beautiful. The colors pop so much. It's really fast paced, and there's just a lot of action of characters running away from the terror that is these invading aliens. Now, first time viewers might be surprised to see that the classic tripod spaceships and the tentacled alien design, you're not going to see that in this movie because that took stop motion and it just turned out to be too expensive. Ray Harryhausen was actually going to work on it. There's a little bit of test footage out there that you can see. Just didn't work out. So you get completely different looking alien spaceships and alien designs than you're used to for War of the Worlds, but they still look really great. I love the look of these spaceships, the bright colors. The aliens don't look like men in suits. Like, they look very unique, and I definitely appreciate that. The characters aren't terribly deep, but they're likable enough, and War of the Worlds, it's just a good time. I really enjoy it. At number 9 is the first movie on the list about atomic radiation turning bugs into giant monsters. It was pretty popular in the 50s. This is Them from 1954. Atomic tests in New Mexico cause common ants to mutate into giant man-eating monsters that threaten civilization. Yes, it was a huge obsession in the 50s of atomic radiation. Obviously, it was on everybody's minds in this decade. It's incredibly apparent in the sci-fi films of the time. Now, this film was actually a big inspiration for James Cameron's Aliens, and it's just a really fun action adventure monster movie, but it's got some creepy atmosphere to it. You hear the ants before you even see them because of this screeching sound that they make. It's actually pretty spooky. The reveal of when you first see one of these ants is pretty amazing. The special effects are fantastic. I feel like they completely hold up to today because it's practical puppetry work, looks really cool. The movie actually gets kind of apocalyptic about ants making humans extinct. At least the threat of that is there. There's some pretty big action by the end with a lot of flamethrowers, and I love when our characters go down through the actual giant ant tunnels throughout the earth. It's really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. The movie does not do a great job with character relationships. You're not going to find a lot of deep characters in this genre in this time, and that's definitely a weakness for them, but overall, it's such a fun movie. I'm just going to keep saying that. At number 8 is a giant insect monster movie that I like even more, and that is Tarantula from 1955. This is directed by Jack Arnold, who is a name you're going to see a few more times on this list. Jack Arnold, as far as I'm concerned, the absolute king of 1950s sci-fi. A tarantula spider escapes from an isolated Arizona desert laboratory, experimenting in giantism, and grows to an enormous size as it wreaks havoc on the local inhabitants. Something that's cool about this movie is the tarantula doesn't grow because of atomic radiation. It's actually a mad scientist kind of thing, where the scientist is trying to create a serum that will grow things because he wants to grow food, because he wants to increase the food supply of the earth, because he's afraid that we're going to run out. And I find that kind of interesting. So he experiments with a few different things. We even find out he's experimented a little bit with humans, and there's some kind of gross looking human monsters in here, which is pretty cool. But it's definitely the tarantula that is the star of the show. Now, the tarantula effect doesn't hold up as well as in Them because you're dealing with puppetry in that, and that's just kind of timeless. With Tarantula, they're filming an action actual tarantula and just making it look big over the screen. But it's one of the best versions of that I've ever seen in a movie. I actually think it looks pretty darn good. I mean, dated, sure, but it looks pretty darn good. There's this incredible sequence that stands out in my head where the tarantula is destroying a house, and it's pretty savage. Like the effect really works for me, and it's kind of scary. And one reason I do put this over them is I think the characters are a lot more fun. I really like the lead couple. The leading lady's name in the movie is actually named Steve, which is kind of funny. And there's just a lot of quirky side characters that populate around them. So I just enjoy the people in Tarantula a little bit more. Number 7 is probably the weirdest pick on the list. You probably weren't expecting to see this, but I can't deny how much I love it. And that is I Married a Monster from Outer Space from 1958. This movie involves aliens arriving on Earth to clone the bodies of and replace humans. And one of their first victims is a young man who is newly married, and his new wife soon realizes there might be something wrong with this guy. Something that's super interesting about this movie is it takes place over the course of a year of this couple's relationship. And just her realizing more and more that he is not the man that she married because she married a monster from outer space that looks like her husband. And there's actually a lot of really interesting social commentary in here about 1950s conformity and gender roles and what happens in marriage if the person you marry doesn't turn out to be the person you thought that you married. It's really, really interesting, but even if you don't think about that, it's still just an incredibly enjoyable 1950s sci-fi movie. Got some weird, creepy alien monster special effects in there that aren't great, but I think are super charming. It even gets really creepy towards the end when you find out that the aliens are only replacing men and they're doing it in order to breed with the women to further their race. Real, just huge violation going on there. Kind of scary. And I just think this movie is great. I think the characters are interesting. The actors are good. It's got just enough crazy 1950s pulp. I mean, look at the title. It's super pulpy nonsense, but it's just a lot smarter than I think you might be expecting. At number 6 is a movie that absolutely has to be on this list because of how incredibly important it is and how great it is, and that is Godzilla from 1954, the Japanese classic. Nuclear weapons testing results in the creation of a seemingly unstoppable dinosaur-like monster named Godzilla. Now, I want to be totally open with you guys. I was a big Godzilla fan when I was a kid, but that love has not really followed me into adulthood like my love for the Universal monsters has. I kind of mostly left those behind. I've revisited a few as an adult, and overall, I'm just not a big fan of the kaiju genre. I love King Kong the most, but I cannot deny how great this first movie is. This is before it gets really silly. This is before Godzilla is clashing with giant monsters, and I totally respect anybody who loves that. I find charm in it. It's just not really my thing. But this movie is so good. The social commentary about the bombing of Hiroshima during World War II is devastating. The way that the movie deals with that horrific event through a giant monster attack is pretty amazing because the attack is not pulpy fun like in Tarantula. It's horrifying. This is a legitimately horrifying 1950s monster movie. Those are few and far between, and I just think that's pretty special. So Godzilla is definitely a great movie, even if I'm not actually a giant fan of the whole franchise, but this first one, it's fantastic. At number 5 is The Thing from Another World from 1951. Scientists and American Air Force officials fend off a bloodthirsty alien organism while at a remote Arctic outpost. Possibly this movie's biggest claim to fame now is John Carpenter later remade it in one of the most respected horror films of people today, I feel like. And while I do love the Carpenter film more, I still think there's a lot of value in this movie. I think it is fantastic. The first cast member that I want to shout out is Margaret Sheridan, who just plays a perfect Hawksian leading lady. Yes, there's no women in the John Carpenter version, but there is in this one, and she's my favorite character. She's so much fun to watch. This is a 1950s sci-fi movie where the dialogue is great. And that's not true of a lot of these movies. The conversations are so much fun to listen to. The flirting between Margaret Sheridan and the main guy, his name is Pat, is so good, and it feels like a classic romantic comedy at those points, and it's really fun to get that kind of thing in one of these movies because it's not common. Now, the monster, the alien, he's very much a Frankenstein-like monster, doesn't resemble the version in the Carpenter film or in the original story that this is based on, Who Goes There. A very Frankenstein-like monster, but still a plant. He's like a plant and like a vegetable, a lot of weird stuff going on. But there's actually some pretty gnarly stuff in here involving like a severed arm and quite a bit of violent stuff. And the monster's always bursting through doors too. A lot of door bursting. At number 4 is such a personal favorite for me. I absolutely love this movie, and it is The Incredible Shrinking Man from 1957. This is also directed by Jack Arnold, king of 1950s sci-fi for me. When Scott Carey begins to shrink a little more every day because of exposure to a combination of radiation and insecticide, medical science is powerless to help him. Through the course of the movie, he must find a way to adapt to his constantly changing new existence. Yeah, the premise of this, if you think about it, is pretty horrifying. Every single day, this guy shrinks a little bit more, and throughout the course of the movie, you see him just get a little bit shorter, suddenly become like the size of a child, and eventually become almost microscopic. Now, it's interesting the way this movie uses shrinking to sort of what's the word I want to use? Be a metaphor for emasculation. And you just see the way his ego and his strength, everything about him is just going down and down, and he's becoming more sad and angry and pathetic. But then eventually in the movie, he gets so small, this kind of becomes an action-adventure movie, and he becomes like an action hero as he's fighting to survive in a completely new world that he's living in, fighting off a giant tarantula. That part of the movie, that second half, after like the sort of depressing existential existence of the first half, is really, really fun to watch, and so interesting watching him try to survive as like the size of an insect, you know? This is the perfect kind of science fiction film because it is a great special effects showcase. It really is. It's got that adventure, but it's a truly meaningful human story. At number 3 is The Fly from 1958. A scientist has a horrific accident when he tries to use his newly invented teleportation device that merges his DNA with a common housefly and blends the two of them together. Now, this is the scariest movie I have ever seen. Now, I'm not saying it's the scariest movie ever made. I'm not saying if you watch it right now, you're going to think that. I don't even think that when I watch it now. But when I was a kid, I watched this movie because I loved Vincent Price, and Vincent Price co-stars in this film. And the ending, the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. It involves a half fly, a tiny half fly, half person caught in a spider web. And it is truly the most terrified I've ever been watching a movie. So obviously this movie has a lot of nostalgic power for me, and that might be why it ranks higher for me than I know it does for a lot of people, but I truly think this is a great movie. It has a much more bleak and hopeless tone than movies from this decade and genre typically have. It's a really sad movie. It's from the perspective of the fly's wife, actually, and her just seeing what happens to her husband after he turns into this monster. This is another movie with a highly respected 1980s remake made by David Cronenberg, and I love that movie as well. And while they definitely do the monstrous transformation a lot scarier and more interesting in that one, I still think the visual of this fly monster is so iconic and so satisfying. And I just have to show off this figure that I have of the fly. This is kind of one of my prized possessions. I just love that I have an action figure of the fly. Love this. At number 2 is the only Universal Monsters movie to make the list, and that is The Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954. This movie is about the conflict between a prehistoric creature that lurks in the depths of the Amazonian jungle and a group of scientists who debate on whether to capture the monster or leave it alone. This is the final film on the list, directed by Jack Arnold, and it's one of those 3D movies that got released during this time to compete with television. But let's kick off by talking about The Creature from the Black Lagoon, the actual creature himself. For my money, it is the best guy in a suit monster of all time. You might say he's at least the greatest guy in a suit monster until Ridley Scott's Alien, but I would still put the creature as the best. It's the design, it's the way the creature moves, it's the way that it looks truly alive, and it's the way that you truly feel sympathetic for this monster. You really feel the humanity inside of him. There's this beautiful sequence in which the creature is swimming with the beautiful and wonderful Julia Adams, who is a star of this movie. And you feel like this romantic connection. You just feel so much in your heart for this creature. He's such a sympathetic monster. But I really like the human characters too. I think this movie has stronger actors than a lot of the movies from this period, in this genre at least. It's a great monster movie. It's got an amazing score, and it's actually got some really cool action by the end when this becomes like a full-out war between the humans and this creature. But my number one had to be this film with no question. That is Don Siegel's The Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956. Probably one of the most influential films of all time. It has been remade so many different times, whether exactly by name or just loosely remade. It's incredible. Now, this film is about a small town doctor who learns that the population of his community is being replaced by emotionless alien duplicates. Something that's so interesting about this movie is, like a lot of science fiction films, even from this period, yes, it does have a lot of social commentary, but it's like such an inkblot painting where people can put so many different ideas onto it. Like, is it about communism and it's against communists? Is it about the Red Scare and it's against McCarthyism? Is it just about 1950s conformity? You know, you can take this movie in so many different directions on so many different sides, which I just think is so fascinating. I think that's why the story has endured as much as it has. And like I said, it has been remade so many different times. Now, I love the characters in this movie. This might be my favorite group of characters when it comes to any of these 50s sci-fi movies, and that's one thing that puts it up above. The pacing is incredible. This movie is never even slightly boring for a second. It moves so well. And I also got the chance to see this movie in a theater once, and man, that's when I really realized, like, this is an incredible movie. Like, it played on the big screen so well. I don't care how old it is. It was awesome. So that's my list, but I want to know yours. Let me know down in the comments below, what are your top 10 1950s sci-fi movies? If you enjoy this, I have a lot of other top 10 lists on the channel. You can check out the playlist of top 10 lists, a lot of classic film categories. Dust off the like button if you enjoy this and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much. With all that said, don't forget to enjoy yourself today. Have some fun, and I will see you next time.